Let's give our brain the opportunity to catch up with our heart by giving it tools to help understand what our heart is doing. If you look at it that way, for the love of humanity and because you and I are so intimately connected, this is the Daily Empowerment Podcast. Daily empowerment to empower you to be wise, to be brave, and to be beautiful. We talked about the 6 different things that could possibly happen when you're asked a question. On your end, you're either going to know, not know, or be unsure of whether you know an answer. And then the truth of that is one or two things. Either you did know or you didn't know. So what should you do with that information? Once you know that those are the possible outcomes of any question that you're asked, what do you do then? Well, before I get into what do you do, I want to go back. We talked a little bit, or I prefaced this a little bit with how I brought my study of economics back into this. And so we want to understand the value of doing this better, of doing this more wisely. So I've made a few assumptions, or I believe there's a few assumptions we have to make if we're going to begin to analyze this in an economics type of format. And there's a few assumptions I think we have to make, and you can decide whether these assumptions are worthwhile at all. The first assumption I made when drawing this out or reviewing this was that our time is finite. That is to say, you and I live in a reality where we experience time in a linear fashion, and that few of us that I know of are actually able to create time. I mean, I guess if you're going around hiring people in that way, you're kind of buying time, but that's where number 2 comes in. The second assumption that it's possible to exchange currency of whatever form for time. So if maybe you exchange time for time, or time for money, or time for high fives, or whatever it is that you can, or someone else can lend you their time, there's a possibility of monetizing time in some fashion. And that there is a possibility or probability that the information is either correct or incorrect. So after we've come up with these assumptions that time is finite, that you can exchange time for value, and that there's a probability that answers can be right or wrong, we kind of want to fit that all together and then look at how we can then adjust those numbers. So I know this isn't the touchy-feely kind of experiment or view of how we should come across to an answer, but let's take a break maybe from letting our emotions guide. Let's give our brain more tools to help understand our emotions better. Let's give our brain the opportunity to catch up with our heart by giving it tools to help understand what our heart is doing. If you look at it that way, let's just have some tools up there, okay? So that's what this can do for you. Or the value of knowledge can be a function of time that you put in, the price that you pay, and the probability that information is correct or relevant to the question. If you look at this post, so go to the website, Daily Empowerment Podcast, and look at this episode, and I'll draw out that equation and how it would look for you there. In economics, they're often trying to maximize the value of that, and for that you have to have multiple iterations of the outcomes and things of that nature. And we can try to do that. We can look at all the various possibilities and maximize it. But in the thick of things, you don't necessarily have time to run an equation before you answer a question. But if we can come up with some standards that can help us reinstitute a wiser way of answering questions, that's going to help. But we need to know what we're trying to manage, the different levers that we can pull on. And that's what that equation is going to help us to do, is to reduce the cost or to manage the cost of answering in a particular way. Remember, we talked about how we don't necessarily have the right standard of how to approach questions and answers because we were taught in a function of fear. So I want to help manage that, and this equation could help do that and how we're going to make the adjustment. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Daily Empowerment Podcast. Daily empowerment to empower you to be wise, to be brave, and to be beautiful. Remember, the views presented here may or may not be those of our management company or our affiliates, and any information you hear should first be reviewed by the corresponding professional, whether that's medical, legal, or financial, before applying it to your life. All rights are reserved by our content's creator.